We're learning Perek Hey Halacha Yud Beis Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah. It says if Isha Tachat Hashemesh V'Tolo, she cannot mix the dough under the sun. Now the Peirush, we're going to go into a lot of different things. Let's start off and see what it says here. A woman should not sit under the sun, where the sun is shining with solush, and he mentions women because women usually know how to bake better than men, and therefore, even by matzahs they used to use women. And not even if the sun is not shining, to be under a cloud when it's chamsin, when the clouds are there. Actually, the clouds make the earth even hotter. Even if you don't see the sun shining. Neither should she leave the dough for a moment. Do something else like heating up the oven. If this woman herself was doing all the parts of the baking, mixing the dough, oif and baking, she needs two vessels of water that should be in front of her. One which she wets the outside of the dough. After it seems after they made the dough and they prepared it, they placed water on the matzah. It's called kituf. Before they put it in the oven. And one that she puts into it her hands because the water that from smearing the water on the dough, the hands become hot, and therefore the dough on her hands, we have to worry about it. So she has to wash off her hands. If she went ahead and made the dough while under the sun, or she did not cool off her hands, or as we learned earlier in the previous halacha, that you should not mix more than you can do, one person can do, then apas muteres. It is muter b'di'evet. The Mishnah cites the Gemara in Sochim 42a. Amar Yuda, Ishalei Tola Shalom Mayim Shalono. That the woman should only use water Mayim Shalono, meaning that it has sat a whole overnight. Shirun Lelinus Acha Shenishavu. They were left at least one night after they were gathered. Dosh Rova. Isha Leitolush Lebachama, Lebachaman, Lebachamet Chaman. Rambam said a woman should not bake matzahs not in the sunlight, not in hot water, and not in water that was heated by springs. And not in water which is gove, not sure exactly. She should not lift up her hands to the tano until she finishes the pas. That she should do it the entire time with the pas, without leaving it alone, and do something else. She needs two vessels, one that she finishes off the dough with, and one that she washes her hands with to keep them cool. Now we come to the next thing. Isa, when she did it in the wrong way. The Gemara questions by a pass. When she went ahead and did it in one of the things that we said she shouldn't do it. Mazutra says the pass is a mutter. Rashi says it's also. Mazutra, it relies on the brisa that you do not chew or mix with water the barley to cause it to lose its husks. And if you did so, if they split, then it's also, but if not, it's mutter. And therefore, Mazutra says the pass is mutter. The Halacha above explains that we're afraid it maybe became chometz when it burst open. But if he did not wash it, if he washed it, then only if it burst, it's also, because then we know it became chometz. But if it didn't burst, it's mutter. Therefore, b'diavad here too would be mutter. Rashi says only l'sisa. We learned that if it didn't burst, it's okay. But here, even b'diavad, the passes also because they tell when you take it not to do it in the sun is because it will become chometz. Mein Grufim. What's mein Grufim? Overlosh be'echon mikol elo apas asura. So the Maggid Mishnah says, how does anyone know that if you didn't do it with water that was taken that day, the evidence also also. He explains that's what mein Grufim is mentioned in the Brisa. Turn the page. The Rif explains that they were gathered that day. That's why Rashi says the evidence passes asura, and that's what the halacha is. So the Hagos Maimonides explains. The Gerufim is from Loshen Nachal Kishoin Gorfel. They gathered it together. Rabbi Hananel explains it means Moishchim, and he relies on the posuk, same posuk, Shemoshchon. They're called Shu'uvim. They gathered that day. In Rashi explains about Gerufim from Hamulaya, which is from a copper pot that's on the fire all the time. And in the hoishes, the copper is very thick. Therefore, even after you take it off from the actual fire, the water within it stays hot or never turns cold. Ruvim is like leftover, and it's left over from the cooking in the pot to have hot water. Brings a third Peirush. Ruvim, that is water that was heated in the tanur after they took out the coals. And he says that in all of these, you can't use this type of water to cook with, to mix the dough with. The Maggid Mishnah says the Rambam Paskins, if you went ahead and did it, only be the evidence also. When you do it with water, as you find Halacha Yud Aleph, if it's hot like the water of Chametz, or it was taken that day. But when it says in Halacha Yud Beis, they did it under the sun, or you didn't continuously work it, or she didn't cool her hands. And when we learned at the beginning of Halacha Yud Aleph that she did a larger measure than the measure of chalo, 2.5 kilo, b'diavad, the pass is mutter. So the Mishnah says, where does Rambam know to make this differentiation? They're all mentioned together in the Gemara. And he explains the Rambam says, since the Gemara doesn't say ovomai, that would then mean that if he did it, what should be the din? But it says over losho. It doesn't say over on all the situations. Elisha is only referring to the waters. But Rambam learned that the machlokes Mosdos and Rashi is only with regard to the water, to what type of water they use. But when it's outside, the evidence would be okay. And other examples that we mentioned. Furthermore, Mazutcha brings a right from the Brisa that you don't chew grains. It's talking about kernels of barley that were mixed with water. So it says only in the quality of the water that it was mixed with. There are paskins like Rav Ashi, if you use the water that is of that type, it's forbidden to do it, and b'diavad the pasta is forbidden. He cites further, there are those who say that if somebody did do it in the sun, it would be osur, not like the Rambam, the pasta is mutter. He says he doesn't agree with them because then it would seem that Mazutra says even if you did it with hot water, the pasta is muteris. If you're going to be inclusive about everything, so Mazutra, who's on the other side who says it's mutter, will be saying even with hot water it should be okay b'diavad. Everyone would agree that we have to worry about chimutz. According to Rashi, even if you did it with cold water, when that were left to be overnight. Since he did it in the sun, the passes also. It doesn't seem that the machloki should be at so far away from each other, but rather if it's with cold water where the sun is shining, according to Rashi, but it's mutter. They're only talking about the quality of water that we're talking about. If it's hot water, then it's a problem. Rae Gann cites proves not like their words from the Gemara. It says Mayim Chamim with Mayim Shaloilonu. Certainly, when you mix the water in hot water, the pass is also ba'achila, because it's impossible that it should not become chometz. Therefore, if you mixed it, whether you mix it with hot water, it's also for himself and for others as well. The Magen Mishnah cites Rabbi Yitzchak having years, the Itu say this is talking about only a matzah that is being watched, they eat it on the night of Pesach, regarding whether you eat shmura matzah. But if you have to eat matzah the rest of Pesach would be okay. But the Magen Mishnah and Rae Gann say that this rule applies with hot water, applies to anything at all, and not only matzah's shmura matzah for the night of Pesach. Furthermore, the Magen Mishnah and Rae Gann say that it should, if that's the case, it should have said Yotzi Yedei Chavos. If we're talking whether it's Chometz or not Chometz, for the night of whether you're fulfilling your obligation, that language should have been used. And since it says Mutter and also, that would seem that it's talking about Chometz, which applies to all of Pesach, and you're not allowed to eat it. And furthermore, Mazutra brings a raya from barley that was washed in water. And there, it's talking about any type of pas from all Pesach. And therefore, he doesn't want to differentiate with this regard. Agos Maimonides cites the Baal Halachos Gedolos and Rabbeinu Hanano, who explain that if he went ahead and kneaded it, made it into dough, it's talking about what we learned in Halacha Yud Aleph, that you shouldn't do it with those type of waters, that even b'di'evet the pas, even after the fact, it's forbidden. And so the Maram in Sefer Mitzvah says that it's forbidden, not like Rashi, and it's talking about when you did it with hot water, but not when it's water that did not stay overnight. From Rab Shmuel Minavrik, the Talmud of Eliezer Mitz, that he disagrees with his Rebbe, and he writes, you have to be worried that it became chometz from water that did not stay overnight, since it did not have time to cool off enough. And B'di'evet the passes also. Also the Bahag, the Balagos writes, you can't eat from pas that was mixed or kneaded with water that did not stay overnight, that before, if he gets rid of it before it becomes chometz, it would be okay. It's only that it's forbidden to be eaten. Rav Yo, the Rebbe, therefore, being a proof for this from what we find in the Gemara in Psachim 42a, that Rav Masna Dorash Bepunya, that you have to mix it with water shalonu, and they were tmimim, and they wanted to use the water of Masna, because they understood shalonu that it belongs to him rather than water that was left overnight. And so you see why Hebrew is a very difficult language. And the next day they brought all their empty jugs to fill up from his water. And we don't find that they didn't eat the matzah that year because they didn't have matzah. And therefore, the hatchila is only when it's awesome. But the eved, if you do it by macherim, the pass is mutter. Avinu B'noyach cites the ritzchius. It's also to eat as matzah's mitzvah because it was not shomok al chosa. But you can eat it the rest of Pesach. He says it could be that the ritzchius relied on a rava that Isha should only use Mayim Shalonu, and he was Geras. His text in the Gemara was Rova a Masna, that Isha should not use only Mayim Shalonu, and everybody bought them their vessels, and therefore you can't eat matzah's mitzvah from something that's not mushuma. And the Mayim Shalonu has to be washed as well, I guess. Now, Shima Mayim Shiva. So you have to watch you have to be keep watching the water as well. Rabbeinu Menachos says the minig in his land is the Yisrael goes with the goy and brings the water for the matzahs, and he doesn't understand why does he have to go with him. Maybe the guy is not believed, and we're afraid that he put flour into the water, right, or some dough. You can't tell because the water is not that clear anyway. That can't be. All of Pesach, when the guy brings water, you should be able to drink it. And we have to watch his water. Maybe he's putting maybe he's putting into it wheat. And a person whose profession is to bring water, he doesn't want to lose his customers, and therefore you don't have to worry about it. Just a tzerach matzahs mitzvah, there's a special thing of being shomor. And therefore, those who are medagding mitzvahs do it even on matzah, even on the water as well. Lishal yedei goy. What happens in places that they didn't do matzah, they nogu that a goy shouldn't need the flour, the dough, even if a Jew is watching, or isa or dough that a goy mixed. It's called B'tseikois Shel Goyim. But it should be done only through Yisrael, and Yisraelis or Jewish who know the mitzvahs of matzah. It's a minig yafu. That's what you should do. We learned that a person could watch what his friend is doing. That's if he's a Jewish one. It has to do with the mitzvah. But a goy that doesn't have to do with the mitzvah can't be trusted. You can't rely on him even if you're watching. And furthermore, therefore Jews go and take their own water matzah's mitzvah, and they bring from the river to the house, so that a Jew will watch it. Shem matzah, not a goy. When you do matzah's, when you gather the water, bring that the reason that you take Mayim Shalonu if you do it at sunset, because at night the shemesh goes under the earth and it heats up the wells. Like the Gemara Psochim 94b. Now, this is a question that discussed as to whether the sun goes around the earth or the earth goes around the sun. But in any case, the sun is on the other side of the earth, and Rebbe says that it would seem that the goyim are correct because by day the springs are cold and at night they're less cold. Therefore, we should take it at the beginning of nightfall before they begin, when they are still cold, at the coldest point at the end of the day. And the Hilchos Chametz adds, this is not like Rashi, who explains the reason because the Chama goes in the days of Nisan at the edge of the sky, and therefore it heats up the earth below. According to Rashi, somebody takes water in the morning and he would leave it till the night, which would be mutter to use. But according to the reasoning of Rambam, that he says that the earth revolves and the sun is on the other side heating up the mayonos. So you should do it only at the end of the day before nightfall, which is the coldest time for taking the water. And also Rabbeinu Menachos says that you should do it a little bit after Shkia Zachama, and that's the minig. How do you watch it? Rabbeinu Menachos says, seems in the Gemara that you don't have to put the water under the heaven after it's gathered. But he says that mikveh, the minig in his generation was to put it in a place that was open. In other words, airy. That's minig yafu. That's what should do, because if you leave it overnight under the air, it becomes even colder. I guess that this was in Europe where the air outside is cold at night. Winter, it's still wintry in Pesach time. Rabbeinu Benoach cites that Hashalmon, which is called Sefer HaShlomo, writes in the name of the Ravid, only Meima Yonois, you have to leave him overnight. The water, which is found in a boil, that was built from Avodim, you don't need to leave it overnight. But today we usually leave it overnight for everything. Now, the Maya Mishnah cites that a woman should not need the dough of the matzah under the shemesh, and these are the words of the Rif. Even to mix it on a day that it's cloudy, you can't do it, even though you don't see the sun, because the Gemara tells us that in a cloudy day that's hot, then every place it becomes it causes a chamsin, it causes a heat wave, and every place is hot. Furthermore, we find in Yuma, we see that whenever you have clouds, the sun is everywhere, even with this shade. Whereas when it's because of the sun, the heat, if you get in the shade, it could be a lot cooler. Rashi explains the chamor shines everywhere and it doesn't go out because the ananim more or less keeps the heat on the ground, and therefore it doesn't circulate, and therefore it remains hot everywhere else. Agos Maimonides adds, therefore it's written in Sefer HaMitzvahs, and Rabbeinu Benoach says that you should be careful not to take mayim to a place where the oven is open to the skies. Maybe they will become hot from the shemesh, even when there is clouds. So even just to bring the matzah out to the oven. Isuk b'dova achav is manalisha. The Magamisha says you should not leave it for a moment. You have to work with the dough constantly. The Rambam explains that she shouldn't try to heat up the oven while she's and forget about working on the dough. That one should continuously work it. And we find it could be as the Gemara in Sochim 48b. Gamliel says 3 women can work at the same time. Why? The Raham disagree that asukos. In other words, the question is whether the word is bake or are busy. That when you say busy, it means one is making the dough, the second one is making the matzahs, and the third one is baking. And not that they're all doing the same thing. They shouldn't all be baking or making the dough, because the Hachamim, each one should be at a different stage, and therefore none of them are being impeded from doing what they're doing or leaving the dough alone. Now, who needs 2 vessels while they're making the dough? The Maggid Mishnah explains the Divrei Rambam that if a woman was both kneading and baking, she needs 2 kelim. Why? Because that same woman is doing 2 jobs, and her hands become hot from the oven, and therefore when she goes back to do the dough, she has to cool off her hands. Rashi explains that even when she does the dough, her hands become hot from the friction of making the dough, and she needs 2 kelim to cause her hands to become cool again. The Tur argues that he does not know why the Rambam wrote kneading and baking, because even when she's kneading and she's not baking, she needs to cool off her hands. Therefore, the Kesef Mishnah says, according to the Tur Rashi, Those who have a meaning that the woman who works the dough should not have a kli to cool her hands is not correct. Now you have to remember they didn't have sinks like we have today, so the only way they could do it was by having water there, a pail of water. But he adds further. The Rambam says it's correct that you need two kelim to tell us that if she was covering it with water, she shouldn't do it with water that cools her hands because they become hot and they would cause the water that she's cooling her hands would become warm and they would make the iso that she would then put the water on become a chometz. But if she does not use water on the dough, then they did not require her to be that meticulous about her hands being cold or not, because we don't find really that the hands cause chometz. Only when she does it with hot hands from the oven, then you need a vessel to cool off your hands for sure, because the oven heats up your hands beyond the normal temperature. And therefore, the minig is that you do not give two vessels for a woman to cool her hands, because we're not dealing with the oven. And so the Hilchos Chametz writes, and Rae Gann argues that in our Talmud we don't find it's only when she also bakes. It brings from Rashi that this is the din by every woman that works the dough, and even the fact of kneading the dough causes the hands to become hot. But he brings a proof to the Rambam from what the Rambam says. Tzrichos shnei kelim is mentioned with regard to she should not leave it alone for a moment. So therefore, it would seem that the reason for the two kelim is to not permit chometz to happen. Therefore, the Rambam writes she shouldn't leave it alone. And when the woman is kneading, she has to be careful only to deal with kneading the dough. But if she is alone and she has to bake as well, she needs two vessels to separate to cool her hands off. Now, it would seem that the Rambam is saying his words according to what the Gemara says. Before he mentions that she shouldn't leave the Isa, he mentions she shouldn't take her hands minatano. And then he says if she was doing both, she needs two kelim. Edu shnei kelim v'tzicho. So Rabbeinu Benoach says in the Gemara doesn't say which two vessels. That she needs two vessels. One that she cools down, covers the top of the dough with, or the matzah, and one that she cools her hands. The Rambam explains she needs a vessel with water to cool her hands. He explains, the Rabbeinu Benoach explains that we could understand it that it means a vessel that is made from marble, which keeps things cold, and and that's where she takes the water to cool down the matzah. The second one, also of marble, is to cool her hands, even without water. But Rambam's text is shnei kelim of mayim, not two kelim, but two kelim of mayim. So we find some that have exact text. In the old ones, they say two kelim, two vessels of water. Rashi explains Mikatefes that she smears on the face of the dough of the matzahs mayim. Rae Gann explains she turns over the dough in order that it should become mixed to get well with the kemach, with the flour, and since it looks like she's cutting the dough in pieces, now she pulls it apart and mixes it together, as we find in after melilois, and it means to cut it. But there are times that you do have to put on water, like Rashi explains, especially if it's too dry the dough. The Magen Mishnah adds that all of his words are correct if she went ahead and did it under the sun, or she did not cool off her hands, or she made too much of the shiur matzah. The pas is mutter. That's those items, except for if you did it in the sun. If she needed it in the sun, there are those who forbid it even afterwards, even b'di'evid, after the fact. Why? Because the Magen Mishnah mentioned Halacha Yud Aleph. The Gemara says in Psachim and Beis Amud Aleph. According to Rav Ashi, if she went ahead and she needed, you can't use it, and that's the halacha. And there are those who explain Rav Ashi forbids it even that she shouldn't do it under the sun. Rambam disagrees, and he says that it's only referring to where the waters, the water, to the Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah, the quality of the water. In b'di'evid, the passes also. But if other things that one should not do, it would be mutter b'di'evid. Rae Gann explains the words of the Gemara. If she went ahead and she needed the pass, it's forbidden. It's talking about only because of maybe they're hot, like hot water, chamihamo, or water from hot springs, or mayim grufim, or water which was gathered together without leaving them overnight. They were just taken, freshly taken. But if it was done with cold water, it doesn't apply. The Chacham only said that regard to the other things, it should be done correctly. And therefore, the Lashon HaGemara is utzricha. She needs to, and lo tagbir yoda. That means she shouldn't do otherwise. It doesn't say v'osul hagbir yoda, but it doesn't mean that if she does so, it's forbidden. I mean, when Rav says in Halacha Yud Beis, when the Rambam says if she went ahead and she did it, and these things, the pass is permitted. It's only if she did it without knowledge. If she did it wittingly, you can't say that the pass is mutter because she was over devir hachomer. She should get punished. The pass should become osa. And if you'll ask, where do you find the Gemara that in Shoigig you say Omar, and Rabbi Menach cites Masech Shabbos, Omar Bishel Chayev Chatos. And since we bring a Chatos only on a Shoigig, so here too, overall is referring she did it unwittingly, not wittingly. But there, everyone would agree you can't use the matzahs. There's a chiddush here. Now, Halacha Yud Aleph Rambam says, but the passes also. Now, West Maimonides cites some Elizabeth admits only if she went ahead and did it with water that did not stay overnight, the mazid, the passes asur. The shoygig gets mutter. So Elizabeth admits learned. Rav Ashi says Ava Velosha is talking only about if he willfully did so. She willfully did so. When in Halacha Yud Beis Ava, it means that she did it unwittingly, not only b'di'evid the passes muteres, but b'mezid we punish her and the passes also. So the Rambam says, how much is this measurement of challah that we mentioned in Halacha Yud Aleph that you shouldn't do it more than that if it's one person? So he answers, shalosh v'avoyim beim, which is 43 eggs worth, the chomish beim, a fifth of an egg. The Magen Mishnah says that this shiur is what's mentioned in Halacha Yud Aleph, and it refers to there as well. In the Gemara Mosdos, it's called kamo melugnoi, 5/4 of a cow, kemach, and that's 43 beim, which is 86 ksesim. Kiguf abeya habeininis. We're talking about not large eggs, but medium eggs. Like a mishkolo. The Magen Mishnah says that the volume and the weight are not the same. The shiur of Isa is talking about the volume as opposed to the weight of the eggs. And he brings down from Hilchos Chametz. The Rambam explains that the mishkol is a shiur Kemach Chiti Mitzrayim. And even though that he cites Halacha Hilchos Chametz, we don't have in Biad Chazorka Hilchos Chametz. In Sefer Zorim, he has it Hilchos Bikurim together with the other mountains Kuna. And Perek Vov over there, that is what he's talking about. The Kavanah's Magen Mishnah Hilchos Chametz. He means Hilchos Bikurim in the Rambam. In Halacha Tesvav there, in Hilchos Bikurim, he says, what is the shiur of a dough that needs challah? As the Maloi Ha'omer Kemach, the Omer was a shiur se'efa. And how much does it contain? 43 eggs, medium sized, and 1/5 of an egg. And they weigh 86 sloim and 2/3 of a selah from Kemach of Chitim that are Mitzrayim. That has a certain measure, that 520 zuz of Mitzrayim today. This measurement is obligatory with challah in every place. Now, Rabbeinu Benoach cites, we learn from Xeris HaKosav how big the omer was, because it says, the Pasuk tells you when you come to Eretz Yisrael and you will eat the wheat of the land, you have to take off challah. And we learn from it says, Aimon, that it came Lechem and Hashemayim, and they gathered Lechem, just like Lechem Hashemayim Yered Imoy Oimeliyim, it came down with Oim every day, which was 43 eggs and 1/5 of an egg volume. Also Lechem Ha'oretz is Chayim B'chalor in that amount. The reason is that if it's greater than that, it's you cannot cause the flour to mix well with the water. Kundal says shiur of the Chazon Ish and his brother-in-law, the Steipler Rov, have the opinion in the shiur of Isa, which is B'chuyev B'Afosh Chalo in Brocha. You have to make a brocha. You can always take up challah, but to do it with a brocha, you measure in a kli which has 4,320 centimeters squared, cubed, and that's the amount of 4 liter and 1/3 of a liter. If you don't push the flour strongly together, Gani Hayra in our generation would separate challah with a bracha on 2 kilo and a quarter. Even though that we said that the shiur is a volume shiur and not weight, still flour of 2 kilo and a quarter of a kilo is the measurement that would come out in volume as well. Halacha l'maisa, the Shulchan Aruch, the halacha is you only use mayim shalonu. The Mishnah Berurah says both for matzahs mitzvah or for the rest of the matzah you do Pesach. Not like the Ritzgeyers who want to differentiate between the two. And he explains in Sivkot and Beis, mayim shalonu is mayim that was left to be overnight in a vessel after you gather them. Like Rashi learns that the springs at night become hotter than they would be during the day. And there are those who explain that at night the sun goes under the earth and that's what causes it to become hotter. Therefore, the Rachom forbade you to use that type of water because they want cold water for the making of the matzah. Muhammad continues, whether the water comes from wells or from springs or from rivers. The Mishnah Berurah says that we're talking about where those come from a spring, and we don't have the reasoning. We have every place that you have to cool it off because the sun hits them during the day and it becomes hot. And the Muhammad adds, you take it during the day. The Rambam says, but very close to Beit Hashmoshes. Mishnah Berurah says, La'atchilo, to begin with, it's correct to take it even after the sunset, technical sunset, you have 18 minutes of Beina Shmoshes. So that's you'll have 12 hours at least before you use it. Because by day the wells are cold, and you'll have also the 12 hours of a night where they're cool. But since you can't exactly know when sunset, when this twilight is, therefore you can do it before a little bit, but you shouldn't do it a lot before sunset, and certainly not a lot afterwards. Still, if you took it a lot before, you can use it for the matzahs. And if you took it at night before chatzos, again, it doesn't have to take exactly 12 hours. The Mechaber continues that you don't mix the water until the night has passed, and you can take from one day for many days. You don't have to do it every day. Go back to the springs. In if it's if it's a hot period of time, if it's a hot period of the year, you should place it in the cellar, which is cold. And if it's cool time of the year, you should leave it outside, because then the house is warmer. And of course, you have to get up early to bring it back in before it becomes a hot day or a cloudy day. Because a cloudy day is considered as if it's totally hot everywhere outside. Mechaber adds, you should not mix hot water, even if they're only hot from the sun. Mishnah Berurah adds that even if they became only not hot, they became lukewarm. Even if they cooled off afterwards, there are those who say you could use it because they were once warm. And there are those who say that once it's cooled off, what's the difference? So if someone inadvertently used water that was cooled off, it's okay. Furthermore, the Mechaber says, not with water that was gathered from a big vessel, which is we call a kumkum, or a hot water, a copper hot water pot, because its outer metal is very thick, and even when you take it off, it remains hot, like Rashi said. Mishnah Berurah says, because it contains heat for a long, long time. The water in it is always lukewarm. Lukewarm, the Mishnah Berurah says, that's as hot as spittle, or like water that you take from the river in the summer. The Mechaber continues, if one went ahead and used this water, whether it was heated from the sun or from fire, or they took it straight from the copper vessel, or that did not stay overnight, so that's what those are matir who permit if it didn't stay overnight, and there are those who say b'shoigig it's permitted, and when you have no other choice, you can rely on them. So the Rambam says, even without pushing things, one should be matir if he did it b'shoigig and he did it with mayim shalei lanu. Furthermore, the Mechaber adds, you do not need it. You do not need the dough in a place of the sun or on a cloudy day anywhere, because it's all hot everywhere. The Rambam says, therefore, the minhag is not to do it near a window, even if there's no sun. Maybe it has it classified as a day that's cloudy, and you won't notice that the hot air is coming in through the window. And so you have to be careful to even to bring the matzahs to the tanur under the open skies, and similarly the water or the flour. The Mechaber continues, you should not. The Mechaber continues, and you should not need the flour next to the oven because of the heat of the oven. Sif Beis Paskins, you should not leave the flour without movement or without doing something with it for a moment. And if a woman cools her hand off, cools the matzah off with her water, she should not use the same water that which she uses to cool her hands, because the water becomes hotter, and they will cause the flour to become chometz. Atchilo, one has to cool their hands in the time of lisha, because they become hot from the friction from the work. The Mechaber concludes she should have one kli with water that she should use to cool off the matzah. And the Rambam says if she didn't cool her hands, the matzah is mutter, because we don't find that, as we learned earlier, that the hands are not an ingredient in the making. They don't play a role in the making of the matzah. From the friction, from the oven dough, it's different. The Mishabura says, what is makatefes? That she covers the pieces of flour, of dough that she gets, with water. And he cites also that she doesn't have to cool her hands even l'chatchila, because they only require her to do so when she does all the actions, not only of kneading but also of baking. But if she's doing only the action of kneading or only of baking, then she doesn't have to. But if she feels that her hands became hot, everyone would agree that she should wash it off. Even lachatchilo, she should cool them off. And this is the thought of many Rishonim. And in actuality, today, every 18 minutes they wash their hands anyway, because with cold water, for that reason. That's why you don't use warm water to wash your hands, because the hands have to be cooled off.